Super, that's us sitting at a couple of minutes past 7 now. So I'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining this webinar from whichever part of the world you're tuning in from. This is the third and final webinar of our three-part series titled February Foot Focus. I am Erik MacKechnie-Guire and I'm a fellow of the British Horse Society, and I'm delighted to be hosting this final lecture. I'm lucky and work with an input to horses that will be competing at the European Championships all the way through to my own small herd of breeding Highland ponies. I'm joined this evening by Gabby Madders and Molly Baxter, who work in the Horse Care and Welfare Department of the BHS. They are actually going to be collating the questions that you will be submitting as the evening goes. Before we start, some housekeeping for this evening. The chat function on Teams is not working. So we go in through our search bar in our web browser and we type in Slido, slido.com. We then put in BHS and you can then type in your questions. Or alternatively, you may send an email to julie.hanna@bhs.org.uk. So that is julie.hanna, HANNA, @bhs.org.uk. The BHS team will be monitoring the questions throughout. Questions will be asked of the speakers by myself once both of them have presented. This webinar is being recorded and will be sent to those that have secured a ticket. The recording will be view only and available for 7 days in Vimeo from the date that the link to the recording is issued. There has been dodgy email links out and about, but the only correct one has been issued by Julie Hanna. At this point, I would like to thank the British Farriers and Blacksmith Association in supporting this series of discussions, and the British Horse Society for facilitating these worthwhile webinars. These online sessions were designed to start a national and international conversation about the structural masterpiece that is the horse's hoof. These hooves are continually renewing themselves to last the horse's lifetime. They are complex, weight-bearing structures on which the horse is reliant to support over 1/2 ton of its body weight, both in a static and dynamic state. As riders, coaches, owners and associated practitioners, we need to continue to look at the ways we as an equine society can do better to understand both the mechanics and management of the hoof, along with the tools and trades to support the foot. We must continue to challenge our understanding of the regulations and science that help us keep our horses' feet in the best possible shape. I'm not going to apologise, but we are going to do a quick recap on what was covered in weeks 1 and weeks 2. In weeks 1, the title was From Shod to Barefoot. We had 3 super speakers, David Greenwood, Mark Trussler and Sarah Logie. The topics that were covered: we discussed the Farriers Registration Council and covered the maintenance of the register of those who may practice farriery lawfully in Great Britain. We covered the conformation of the foot, and we had a huge amount of visual slides packed into this presentation, which was just brilliant. We also heard the really interesting case study about Raf and his journey from barefoot to shod, to barefoot to shod, and finally back to barefoot, and the reasoning behind his personal journey. Week 2, the title was Keeping Feet in Great Shape. This was given by Sarah Brown and Mark Johnston. This session touched on good nutrition, pasture management, hoof boots. Are they a good alternative, and who's the person to advise and fit them? We also had an insight into balancing a foot and the decision they make when first confronted with a horse and their owner, and the effects ground surface has on the foot structures. So moving on to this evening's topic. This is week 3, surfaces and competing. We're lucky to have Axel Vibe and Benson presenting. So this surfaces and competing is the third. It's all about sport and modern surfaces, from sand to synthetic, fibre, rubber, recycled, indoor and outdoor, all influencing the hoof. Competing and the rules surrounding shoeing and the different circumstances that will be discussed, as well as safety, slipping and slippage, and speed. The role of the judge may come into it, giving the right impression and ultimately back to where we started 3 weeks ago. equine welfare and the miracle that is the equine hoof. So I'm now going to do an introduction of our first speaker. Axel Vibe joins us all the way from Norway. He's sitting at home, 3 foot of snow outside and -5, but he says the conditions are good. I'll believe him. I was riding outside tonight on grass for the first time this year. It was just heavenly, so it was in the sunshine. I'm glad I'm in Warwickshire, not in Norway at the moment. So Axel started studying in Norway in 1993, working for many established farriers along the way. In 1999, Axel set up his own and later in 2007 introduced his skills through a vet clinic, specialising in remedial shoeing and the training of his other aspiring farriers. In 2016, he achieved his associate's qualification here in the UK. Axel regularly gives lectures and talks over the world, including to vets, professionals and other farriers. Axel has customers which have competed at the Olympics and various world championships, often travelling with the teams. He has also been the duty farrier at several world championships. Axel has a keen interest in the whole horse concept and is eager to develop himself and optimising his work through understanding advanced horse assessment techniques and diagnostics. So at this stage, I'd like to hand over to Axel, who's now going to give you his presentation. Thank you, Axel.
Well, thank you for that, Erik, and thank you for inviting me to speak for the British Horse Society and the people who's interested in this topic. So I'm not gonna have any slides tonight. There's been loads of slides, and I've been watching the previous lectures, and it's been pretty impressive. Sorry, how much knowledge and at a very high level they've been executing and they've been showing. So what I'm gonna talk about is a little bit of my experience working with top show jumping riders on the management of being barefoot. And one thing is, like in sports, we do say that good welfare also gives good results, and if the horse not thriving and being healthy, you won't have the good results over time. So that is the basics of anyone who is really successful in sports today. Is over long term, that is welfare, just have that 100% sure. So they do everything they can. This is not, they are not, can I say, they don't have a idealistic view on it. They don't think of this being barefoot as some kind of a philosophy. This is just pure looking for the best results. And I was involved in a research project where they measured a lot of things around the mechanics, where they compared shod versus unshod. And the results of this research is not out yet, but I can reveal that it does show differences and does like show a lot of the things that we already know and already been well known in the Farriery, like the foot without a shoe on expands more. We got more flexion between the two hoof halves, and also the load sharing is different when the horse is not shod. So how does this affect the actual performance of the horse? And what we can say is that when the foot is following the surface, the working surface more, as it then gives better load sharing and also more flexion, it makes the horse move. This is the riders who says it, then also the research said it makes the horse move more confident and also more energy economic. It spends less energy. Because of the lower weight, it also have a higher frequency, and the stride is lower off the ground. And obviously this is good for some sports, for example, show jumping. This is good for dressage. is not so good, because you want more, you want the foot to be longer in the air to have like a bigger movement, but it also gives a greater impact when the foot lands. So you need to work on a certain type of surface to avoid strain and injuries on tendons, ligaments, and also joints. So, and that brings us to surfaces. And here is like very I know that Ben is gonna talk more about surfaces later, but it's basically wear, and that means that it's less or more wear than the foot is growing. And if you work on a surface that wears out the foot more than is growing, you need to protect it, the foot, if you're going to keep the same, if you're going to train the horse the same amount. And this is the thing, like when you're having a performance horse, you have to work it a certain amount. It's obviously individual from horse to horse, but if you cannot cut down because this suits the hoof growth. Hoof growth is also individual. This means that when they're out hacking, which there are a lot of them, they need to have protection on. And in many cases, they use boots. In some cases, they also get shod. And another thing is that they have to take in consideration is how uneven the ground is, because since we have established that the flexion in the foot and the load sharing in the foot is greater when there's unshod, that also means that if you're working on an uneven, it could actually be very damaging to not have the shoe. And that also the same stability, and the boot will also not give the same stability to the foot. And here we're talking now, for example, possible injuries is coffin bone fractures. So there is some benefits from stabilizing the foot as well. So when I said earlier that is the expansion and the flexion in the foot is bigger when it's not shod, that can actually not good for the training regime for that particular horse, and it needs protection and stabilizing to do their job, because that's what it's all about. It's like giving the horse opportunity to do their job. And I would say like some of the long-term effects of being barefoot when we look at the health, we do see that a lot of the horses that is working barefoot, they have less injuries. This is not, we don't have any research saying it, but we can see at the yard and its whole, the expenses to that is going down. But, and this is the big but, like, because you're not like you're going to spend less money on that, because the management is far greater. One thing is talk to the groom, which is the rider, the Olympic rider, that sees some benefits from this. But when you talk to the grooms that actually has to manage it, is a huge job they're putting out. They have to use rasp to rasp of small flares of the foot on a regular basis. There is boots on and off all the time. There is a lot of work put into keeping the yard nice and even, and make sure that the horses is not out on a surface that is weighing down. For example, in Scandinavia, we have a lot of bear frost. That means that they have to exercise the horses other places, maybe cannot have them out in the paddock. They have to exercise them other places, lead them around. So it is a lot of work for the grooms to keep it nice. And it's also not like they don't have a farrier. I actually look after these horses more regular than if they were shod. So I would say what they maybe save in injuries, they have to invest in a different way. Obviously, saving in injuries is good horse welfare and is good for the long term. But also we know that if they go sore over time, that can also affect the internal structures. Because we like to say that if the foot function, the hoof function is better, that takes care of the internal structures better, which I'm sure it does. But also, if it goes sore-footed over time, that also breaks down internal structures. I actually seen loads of examples of X-rays where you can see that the coffin bone is going deformed when it's been sore over time. So that is also something that we actually do monitor. We take X-rays of them. We very much look after them in that way. And I also want to say something here about a little bit the perspective from outside. I call it outside of the law, outside of UK. Because in Scandinavia, we don't have any regulations of farriery or hoof care. Anyone can do it. I can give my mum tools and she can go out shoeing tomorrow if she like. And I believe actually that, and this might be a little bit controversial, but I think that some of the reason why barefoot trimming actually has been popular in Scandinavia for a longer time than it's been in UK. I've been in debates like this or doing seminars like this for the last 20 years in Scandinavia, and I see now that the discussion is getting more and more relevant in UK, and I think that some of that is actually because why there is a bigger environment for barefoot trimming here is because farriery is not protected. Not necessarily because anyone can do it, but because we struggle to raise our standards of shoeing. The standards of shoeing in UK, the standards of training in UK, farrier training in UK is higher than it is in Scandinavia, undoubtedly. I know this because I have a Scandinavian training and I also have an exam from UK. So I believe that a part of why a lot of people has taken shoes off is actually because the shoeing hasn't been that great. So, and I think that this is one of the things that is so good with UK and the system you have there, and to all the farriers as well, why you should really appreciate the FRC and the BFBA, which is organizations that is working for protecting the education of farriers and also protecting the horses through who can do farriery. And I know that there is no legislation that covers trimming so far, but I hope there will be, because if not, you are risking a lot. So, like for all your horse owners out there, you really need to appreciate using someone that is actually registered in the FRC. I think so. I seriously think so. So I know that Ben has a very long lecture, not very long, but he's prepared very, very well. So I'm going to hand the word over to him, and I'll going to stay here for questions later if there's any interest.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Axel. For those of you that joined slightly late, the chat function is not working on Teams. So if you could go into your web browser and type in slido.com, then put in BHS, and you can type in your questions. Alternatively, you can email them to julie.hannah@bhs.org.uk. So that's julie.hannah, HANNA@bhs.org.uk. So that's for the questions, and all I can do is apologise for Teams chat function not working. So thank you very much, Axel, for your presentation. Tonight we're moving on to Ben Benson. I'm very fortunate to say Ben is my home farrier for the best horse that he shoes in the country, and he's very fortunate he shoes my beautiful, well, I wish he was mine, Highland Pony Stallion Rory. I've got a huge amount of respect for Ben, and probably my respect went through the roof when I had a yearling with limb deformity, and I spoke to Ben about would he be interested in taking it on. He said no, because actually that wasn't his specialist field. So actually I then went with somebody that was a farrier that was recommended by the orthopedic surgeon, and Ben and this other farrier got on really well. So it was really good to hear that farriers have their strengths and they're also not going to dip their toe, which isn't in their specialist field. So that's great. So Ben Benson, where do we start? Well, he's a master farrier. He grew up around Farriery as a result of his father, because his father was a farrier in West Wales. He started his apprenticeship with the great Hayden Price, and that is really what sparked Ben's interest in performance horses and the area that is sort of specific to Farriery for sports horses. He has a busy practice in Oxfordshire and works on a huge range of horses and donkeys and even a goat. So these are from Olympic level and dressage horses down to amazing Highland Pony stallions. He works with referrals from vets, allied professionals, as well as other farriers. He has worked as a consultant for Team GB Equestrian, which is the first place where I actually met Ben, and he also has been involved with several other nations' equestrian teams over the last 15 years. He has been fortunate to be one of the head and lead farriers at the last 3 Olympic Games. Ben is currently president of the British Farriers and Blacksmith Association. Now, I have seen the lovely gold chain that he gets to wear, and he looks like Lord Mayor when he's in it, and he wears it really well. So I'm sure it was a huge privilege to get that call up, Ben. So I'm delighted to hand over to Ben Benson, who's now going to give his presentation. Thank you, Ben.
Well, thank you very much for that, Eric. No pressure. I think you should have said from Olympic horses up to Rory.
Thank you.
Because obviously he's the main man. I'm just going to screen share now. Sorry about that. This is technology at its best. There we go. Okay, can you see that now, Eric?
That's you now, ready to go. Thank you, Ben.
All right, thank you very much. Well, thank you very much to the BHS and Horse Scotland for inviting me to speak. It's a great honour for the whole of our industry to have an opportunity to work with such a big organisation like the BHS, and something that has such a big membership and such a passionate following of horse people. As Eric said, I'm a farrier. I'm a training farrier, so I have apprentices, and I'm based in Banbury in Oxfordshire. What we're going to go through today is a quick sort of skip through showing the performance horse, and it's showing horses that do multiple disciplines, and effectively coming about it from a performance point of view. So the first thing that we have to look at when we work with our horses is, why do we shoe horses? Now, we visited this on pretty much both of the last lectures, but I think certainly when it comes to performance horses, we have like an extra level where we're looking to with it. So firstly, we shoe horses for grip, protection, and support. Now, when it comes to performance horses and horses that are working in a school, in an outline, over a fence, support comes at different levels. It's a bit like the saddles that you will ride in and the tack that you will use. It suits your individual needs in a way that necessarily wouldn't support all other horses. So it has to be fitted specifically to you. It might be the same make of saddle as your friend, but neither of you could swap saddles. So that support is absolutely critical to what your horse actually needs. So when we look at support, we look at the definition of support, which I think is really important. It's to bear or hold up a load, a mass, a structure, or a part, etc., or to serve as a foundation for. To sustain or withstand weight, pressure, strain without giving way, or serve as a prop for. And I think when we start looking at our performance horses and our working horses, our sport horses, shall I say, that actually we start realising how we're asking them to use their body in a completely different way to that they would do on the prairies of America or in the wild. They're going in a completely different way, and they're much older than they would be in the wild. So that support and that protection that we're offering them has a different context. So when we think about weight bearing within the equine, one of the first things we have to realise is how much pressure and how much strain goes on the limb. So as a rough outline, a 600 kilo horse at a walk, half of its body weight would go through each foot as it lands and hits the floor. So when we start thinking about it now, as we sort of build up, we realise why horses start having tenderness problems, pathologies, joint issues, because the amount of loading and the amount of pressure that we're putting on them and the things we're asking them to do is quite specific, is quite large. So, you know, you think at a gallop, 2 to 2.5 times the horse's body weight. That's for a 600 kilo horse. That's 1.5 tons going through each foot, each stride. So when we look at the horse's skeleton and we see the horse stood statically, 40% of the horse's weight goes on its hind feet and 60% of its weight is on its front feet. That's primarily because of the head and the neck, that is there as an extension on the forelimb. The front feet are held on by the thoracic sling, which is a load of muscles which strap those front legs on, and the hind legs are held on by skeletal attachment. Now, this is something that we are then working around. The horse's centre of gravity is around its wither. Now, within competition, and I go back to competition, within collection, and when you're asking that horse to be ridden, what we're actually looking to do is we're asking the horse to engage from behind. So we're actually looking to swap that round. So we're asking the horse to take more of its weight on its hind limb, to come that little bit more uphill, and that gives the horse the propulsion and the ability to turn as we need them to. So in some cases and in some movements, you're asking that horse's hind limb to take even a third more weight than it's designed to take. So when we think about structures and we think about all the anatomy that's in place, it's no wonder that we see quite a lot of horses with joint and ligament and tendon problems as they get on with their job in their career. Now, a quick one that we're going to start about is rules about shoeing and barefoot. This came up. Now, I've done as much research as I possibly could, and I've spoken with British Dressage, British Eventing, British Jumping, and the FEI and the BHA. So currently, British Eventing and British Jumping don't have any rules for shoeing per se. All they have is a rule which basically comes back to welfare. So as long as the horse is deemed safe and not in any danger, so it's not lame and it's not slipping unreasonably, then the horse is more than welcome to run without shoes on. British Dressage the same. The only rule that you have within shoeing with British Dressage is that feet cannot be taped and cannot be covered by tape. So you can put glue on them, you can put shoes on them, you can put but you can't put tape on them. And I'm not sure what the rule would be on boots. I think that would be something that the steward on the day would have to see. Interestingly enough, the FEI doesn't have any rules on shoeing, again, other than the coverall of welfare and horse welfare and rider safety. The BHA, British Horse Racing Authority, their ruling, as far as I'm aware of, is that flat horses must be shod unless there's a letter from the veterinary, covering veterinary surgeon to give dispensation, if there's a reason why they don't need to be or why they can't be. And then as far as national hunt, you're more than welcome to run barefoot in that. I think, again, it comes back to that thing of as long as the horse is in control, is sound, and there isn't a welfare issue, then, you know, happy days, you're free to do whatever you'd like to do. The other thing when it comes down to sporting considerations, and this, again, is something that as the horse comes up through the levels, a bit like a car, really. I'm going to use a lot of analogies tonight, so I do apologise. But with horses, it's exactly the same. What we're looking to do is we're looking to set them up for the job they're going to do, for the event they're going to go at. And for me, with my eventers, be it how I shoe them for a wet spring badminton would be completely different for a hilly, dry Burley at the end of September. I am considering the ground conditions those horses are going to have. I'm going to be considering the terrain that they're going through. I'm going to be considering the jumping efforts that they're going to have, be it undulation. And then, you know, if we move away from eventing and we go into show jumping, obviously, if they're on a surface, that's going to be flat. It's going to be fairly consistent in its going. And it's not too bad. Now, obviously, if that horse is on a beach, so if it was doing the Global Champions Tour and it's at Palm Beach, then obviously that might have a different consideration. Certainly with dressage, where you tend to get different sorts of movements and a lot more sort of static movements, as it were, where you've got more up and down, then the footing is even more important. So I might end up putting pads on certain horses, certainly when they go to Europe, where they run a lot on just plain sand. That can have quite a different impact on the horse's foot and how the horse is able to go. So there's all these things that I have to think about, and I'm thinking ahead, and I'm shoeing them just for that race. As we saw, and I was amazed to see on Strictly Come Dancing, and I was watching this program just for research purposes only, Eric, just to let you know. Good, solid, well-balanced feet are the perfect foundations for good, solid, well-balanced movements. And this leads us into the next bit now, is that the feet really are the foundations for what we're asking. And then on top of the feet, we have our limbs. So it's really important that everything is balanced and sits neatly on top of each other to give that stability for that key movement. As you increase the amount and degree of collection, you then increase the amount of pressure and loading, therefore greater support is needed behind. And the other thing I tend to see quite a lot is common injuries also tend to then shift from front to hind. Quite often it's surprising with a lot of the remedial work that I get coming into the forge, how even though we might be dealing with a forelimb injury, quite often there's a hind limb conformation that matches it. So quite often I see that actually maybe the forelimb is the secondary and the hind limb is the primary, and stability from that horse as we ask it to collect, as we ask it to engage from behind, if it's not able to push straight or travel in a straight direction, we might get that the horse slightly comes out on 3 tracks, which then changes the whole loading of that horse as it moves forward, and especially over fences. The other thing to look at as well, and this is something that, again, we go back to the shoeing for the specific sports. When we have racehorses, that racehorse is travelling in a straight line. It is turning at points, but it's travelling relatively at one constant speed, and effectively the horse's back is flat. As we then move round and we start increasing collection and start reducing our velocity, we then see that the horse's back has to become more curved. That then changes the horse's pelvis, at the angle of the horse's pelvis that it's effectively sat at and squatting at. So we all know if we have to stand up suddenly and do a squat, the wider and the more square that our feet are underneath our body means that as we descend down over our knees and then push back up, the more our body is able to be as stabilised and as central as possible. And that's the same with horses. So what shoeing allows me to do is allows me to try and get that limb to be as balanced as possible. And I think that's the bit where, just like you have with your saddles, where you'd have a jump saddle, changes your seat and the mechanics of your seat on that horse to allow you to be more free, whereas the dressage saddle encourages you to sit a little bit deeper and encourage and helps your body to be as mechanically advantaged to the horse. Shoeing is the same. So it's about using shoeing at sport and horses with conformational injuries or conformational problems. It's looking at how we can use that to balance it and give ourselves the best possible chance. So with our sport horses, where we see where show jumping and dressage are the sports or phases that constantly require the most support from the horse's foot. Limbs are put under massive amounts of pressure, especially when on a loose surface, as that foot slides forward. It's really important that the foot is as balanced and symmetrical as we can get, be it shod or unshod, but it is crucial that we have that platform there for the horse to sit on. And the feet are the foundations to give them the mechanical support and the stability they need, and importantly, the safe platform to push off during locomotion. The other thing to remember is not all horses are perfect, obviously, other than Eric's horse, Rory, the unicorn. The one thing that you'll know is, just like people, we all have a foot that turns out or a body that's a little bit asymmetrical. And that's not saying no horse is perfect. No Grand Prix dressage horse has perfect conformation. But it's about having the best that it can possibly have. What I'm showing here is that so this is a dressage horse that I had, and the horse toed in on one foot, and you can see the top left picture there. I put a line down the centre of you can see that line down the centre of the limb, so you can actually see just how offset that foot is slightly. Whereas with my shoe, what I'm able to do is I'm able to stick the shoe out slightly on one side and create a little bit more of a platform. So I explain this to my apprentices as being a bit like a traffic cone. I want the centre of the point in the middle of the base, or like stabilisers on a kid bike. They both need to be the same length, the same angle, in order to make sure that there's no tilt. So when that horse gets onto that soft deformable surface and presses down with a ton of body weight at a canter, that footprint is even on both sides of the feet. Because if the footprint's even, then the loading on the fetlock, all the ligaments up and down from the fetlock down, and even up into the knee, and even for a hind limb, it's even more important because the hind limb is skeletally held on. So torque is able to be, or twist rather, is able to be distorted and absorbed much more in the horse's forelimb because the legs aren't held on mechanically, they're held on by muscle. So that muscle can twist and absorb that, whereas behind, because you have a mechanical attachment, there is nowhere for that to go, which is why we see horses with stifle problems and SI problems and hop problems, because with the horses, sometimes quite often with the horses slightly twisted or deviated conformation at levels like repetitive strain injury. As the horse gets older, it catches up with them. So shoeing gives us the ability to reduce that as much as we can. Within each sport, there's a different set of requirements. I know this might seem pedantic, but I think it really is important for us to all realise that we understand there's no way we'd expect a Farriery to go across a ploughed field like a Land Rover does. Now, each horse horses nowadays are hybrids. They have been bred selectively by humans for hundreds of years to give us the optimum performance animal that we desire. Now, ultimately, the one there that has got there because it does the best job for everything, and it's the least maintenance heavy, is your more of a native horse. So when it comes to performance horses and it comes to barefoot, you're going to have a bit of a trade-off, and it's important to realise that each horse has its own specific requirements. So it's important to know what its limitations are, and that again is something that I think I have performance horses that are barefoot. I have dressage horses that are barefoot, and I have some eventers that event at low levels that are barefoot, and it's absolutely perfect for them. But they have the conformation that means that they can cope with it. Also, there are other things that come along with sport and repetitive strain injury, which you can't necessarily always get away from. You know, in the picture here, I've put in there's a quarter crack that you can see on the heel there. And then you've got splints that come up as well through concussion, through, again, a slight deviation. And equally, shoeing gives us an opportunity to reduce that as much as we can. And it gives us the ability to put something in place. So effectively, the best way of dealing with bad mechanics is to try and use good mechanics. And if I can't achieve that with just the trim on its own, and that's where I find that the shoe comes in as that extra bit to kind of give me the last 50% to get over the line. The one thing that that I must admit that the show jumpers and especially the barefoot guys are so more in tune with, because they have to be, is the surfaces. If you think now, we've seen a whole generation of horses which have been born and broken and worked and retired, working their lives on artificial surfaces. You think back in the 80s and early 90s, we still had regional dressage competitions that happened on grass. We don't get that anymore. We're much more fussy about the surfaces that we ride our horses on. And you guys as riders all know that there's certain surfaces that you can ride your horse on where it feels like it's absolutely on the money. And then you get on other ones where you feel like someone's let the air out the tyres, because the effort required to go on them is quite different. So we started off, you think originally it used to be wood chip. The second one from the left there, then third one from the left, then we went into sand, There's quite a lot of surfaces now in Europe, as I said earlier, still run on sand. And if it's the right sort of sand, it's really good. If it's the wrong sort of sand and it's quite firm and doesn't really slide or move much, quite coarse, then that can be really hard going for them. Then on the right hand side we had rubber, which again was great in its time. It meant, you know, it wasn't necessarily, it didn't break down like the wood chip did and didn't kick up lots of dust. However, as we know, in the summer when it got dry especially, it got really, really deep, and that took quite a lot of managing. And also in the winter then everything was black and horrible. And then on the left hand side we went into a very high wax content. Now this was the favourites for all the training venues and all the competition venues, because it's so hard wearing, it didn't move. So it didn't need much tailoring, it didn't need much managing, it didn't need much levelling, and a lot of people thought it was brilliant. But we found that actually it created a lot of problems, because it was so sticky that effectively the foot wasn't able to move in it. So because it locked the foot in, it then created more jar, which the only place for that horse's body to be able to absorb it was soft tissue and joints. So actually we found that horses, especially jumping on wax surfaces or doing collected work on wax surfaces, ended up with long-term repetitive strain injuries caused certainly enhanced by that surface. So what we sort of ended up with now, which we've seen a lot of the venues internationally, is the bottom right now is a sand and cloth with a small amount of binding wax mixture. This is perfect because what it allows is it allows the foot to move across it, so it doesn't lock the foot in, but equally it's strong enough to be able to hold itself together. It bounces, it flexes, but again, it doesn't move too much. So it's about the right mixture, and it's about the right content now, and we're seeing this more and more universally used across all our competition venues. Now, the one thing that people probably don't realise as well when we go into surfaces is the science behind it is phenomenal. On the left-hand side, you can see you've got your 100-metre sprint with, you know, Usain Bolt on the right-hand side winning as per normal as he did. What we knew with, or what we know with running tracks is actually it had to be put down at the right frequency. And you may have read somewhere where people talk about certain tracks being fast running tracks or slow running tracks. Well, what that comes down to is effectively that the vibration that comes down through the runner's foot into the tarmac, the vibration that goes down into the tarmac, then it comes back up, it's reverberated back up and into their foot. It has to happen at a certain frequency. Now, if it's too slow coming back up, that would be quite a dead track. And if it's too quick coming back up, it can interfere with the ground reaction force and the landing and the loading through the foot into the ground, and that can be quite off-putting. Now, we have exactly the same with the Olympic venues, and the FEI actually runs this little kit at the back there. You see that there's a chap driving it with a golf buggy. That's a guy called Lars Ropstroff, who is a good friend of Axel's, who did the study with him out in Scandinavia. And then behind he's got a little buggy, and this buggy breaks down into like 5 suitcases, and this goes around the world to all the big venues, and effectively it's a pneumatic ram with a board just on the bottom of it with a shoe on it, and it drops it and bounces it off the floor. This footing is tested all the way around the venue to make sure that the ground reaction force or the surface vibrations are optimal, and that's optimal for the different sports. So what we do at the big venues, you'll see for the show jumping, they'll run rollers on it and firm it down, and then when it comes to the dressage time, they'll run their tines through it in a different sort of setup, and that'll actually lift it up and make it a little bit more flexible, a little bit more bouncy, in order to help that sort of elevation of movement. It's pretty impressive when they do it. And when you think about the surface technology that we have now, in London, the surface at London was about, I think it was about 12 inches thick, and it had about 6 or 8 inches of stone underneath it to give it the perfect depth for that to happen. At the test event, they didn't have enough stone in it, and a lot of the jumpers said that when they were landing, and a lot of the dressage riders said that when the horses were doing the real collective work, they could feel the vibration through because obviously it was on a man-made it was on like a big balcony that was out there on a platform, they could feel the vibration coming back up through. So they ended up putting stone in it to deaden it. So they ended up with a 12-inch thick surface at London that could take sort of 80, 90 mil of rain within an hour. And after 15 minutes of the rain stopping, it was able to be ridden on. We fast forward then to Rio, and the technology had got even better. And the surface that they put in there was 9 inches thick. It didn't need any stone underneath. And that was able to take, I think that was able to take 100 mil of rain and 15 minutes within an hour. And then 15 minutes after the rain stopping, it was dry enough to be able to ride on. And then we fast forward to this picture here where we're at Tokyo, and this surface there, because of the monsoons, had been tailored to be able to give the same ground reaction force as we had back in London, but this was 6 inches thick. This could take 135 mil of rain within an hour, and the moment the rain stopped, within 15 minutes, it was dry enough to be able to give the right frequency to be able to be ridden on. So the technology that we're seeing and the understanding that we have for surfaces is phenomenal now. I'm not an expert in it, but it is something I think that not enough riders and horse people take for granted. You know, we trot around what's in our local riding club or where we have our lessons, but actually when we get off and understand it and walk it, that's a key thing. And certainly when I'm looking at setting up horses and working with riders, the first thing I'll do weekly whenever I'm there is I will always walk their arena, and I will always walk around and see what it feels like to me, because how I shoe one yard is completely different to how I shoe the other, even though they might have the same horses. So bringing us on now to one style of shoe for all. This is another concept that a lot of people don't understand, is that actually different sports need different types of shoes because it facilitates the grip and the traction that we need. So like in our own life, we all understand how these players would need a specific shoe relevant to them. And if either or the others, it wouldn't work. But it's the same for eventing, it's the same for jumping, it's the same for dressage. Again, when it comes to trying to balance these horses and try and give them the stability they need, each one of these shoes gives me a slightly different grip option. So at the top, on our right-hand side, that would be a shoe that I put on for an eventer. It has quite narrow ridges around the perimeter. And what that means is the whole of the foot surface is transferred onto those two ridges. This section has been around for about 100-something years. And it's really effective for giving sort of the best multi-grip over everything that we need. The next shoe down that I have would be the sort of shoe that I put on some of my show jumpers that are jumping on grass or jumping on the surface or on multi-surfaces, because it's a bit of a halfway house. It has a wider ground surface on it, so it allows the foot to slip and slide a little bit, but equally, when those horses are cantering or jumping on grass, there's enough there for that to cut in. I'll put this shoe quite often on some of my eventers as well, because when they're not necessarily competing all the time on grass, and certainly during the winter months, you know, a lot of our eventers, a lot of our performance horses now are ridden primarily on a man-made surface. So I kind of need to shoe them like a dressage horse or a show jumper that's jumping on a surface that also needs to go on grass. And then the bottom right, I have this is called the 3/4 fullered shoe. This is a really flat, wide shoe, and this again gives me a little bit of grip where the fullering is or the groove, but ultimately it gives me a big, wide, flat surface with which to keep that horse's foot on the top of the surface, so it allows it a bit like a snowshoe to sit there to allow it to twist and dissipate some of that energy and not lock the foot into the ground too much. This is a sort of new phase, not new phase, this is a new area that Farriery is going into. We probably see that Farriery has developed more in the last 15 years than it probably has in the last 150. We have new technology, we have cameras, we have smartphones that allow us to share ideas from all over the world. And when it comes to where we're going, I keep saying to farriers and riders, you know, top left, I don't know if any of you know this guy, he's a guy called Kipchoge, and he won. He didn't win. He was the first man to get under 2 hours in a marathon. There was a number of contributing factors to that. Ultimately, the human species hasn't really evolved that much in the last 20 years to be able to give us a game changer, just like horses have. Certain body types do well, like we've talked about, and certain don't. However, one of the contributing factors for this chap managing to get under the 2 hours was the pair of trainers that he and his team were wearing. They're the bottom left there. They're called Nike Vaporflies. Now, at one point, when I last checked, there was something like 31 out of 37 world records were held by people wearing Nike Vaporflies. They were so successful that actually a number of other shoe companies tried to get them banned. And for the first time ever, the OIC had to have a rule on trainers. And it was effectively Nike pointing out that they hadn't brought anything new to the table. They just merely put together what other trainer companies had done already over the last 20 years. And they created the Vaporflies. These have a certain type of foam, a certain little carbon plate in them. And basically what they do is they help the runner to keep their foot in the air for longer. Now, because they keep their foot in the air for longer, it increases the landing velocity. And also it changes the breakover. But because the shoe helps them to absorb that energy and recycle it, it on average gave your professional runner between 4 and 6% more efficiency saving over the average marathon, which for the average runner works out at somewhere between 90 seconds to 6 minutes, which is quite considerable. Now, they're not doing anything wrong, but they're just simply helping. And equally, we're starting to see now with farriers like myself and Axel, as we do our performance horses and we start seeing the intricacies of things, because at that level, it's not about getting it right, it's about what you get wrong. So it's about all the advantages that we can bring in to help minimize certain conformations' negative effects on the animal's gait, because that's ultimately what we're here trying to do. So we're trying to optimize that horse as best we can. And that's where I go back to, I know I've been talking solely about shoeing so far. I'm not anti-barefoot, but I'm just saying is that at a high level where it's about what you get wrong, not what you get right. And certainly if you want to be competitive. And the shoes that we have here give me the ability to stabilize feet, to stabilize limbs coming into a fence or as the horse is collecting. So a horse, but the shoe on the top right there, this was a horse that had a mediolateral imbalance. It also, its foot had a slight medial rotation. So I was able to add a very thin plate. You can't quite see it because of the picture here, but this plate is probably about 1.5 mils thick. But it's just enough for me to be able to put in, and it means that under load on a canter pirouette to the left, canter pirouette to the right, it was able to give the horse that little bit more stability, which gave it the symmetry and movement on both reins. And that's ultimately where we're winning with our horses, because as you know, the standards in competition now has got unbelievable. And if you think at the last World Championship, you had whole teams sat in under 1% difference between the team collective scores. So it's so tight at the top now, and it's everything that we can do to help. So as we go in, it's the one thing to think about, and one of the take homes that I'd like everyone to be aware of is where there's an imbalance, there's always a compensation, and that's ultimately what it is you're trying to achieve with your trimming or with your farriery. We know, and that science has told us with the RVC Professor Renata Weller, she had some facts and figures which she shared with the farrier world about 5 or 6 years ago. It's for every 1 degree of negative rotation, so that's effectively the pedal bone tipping backwards, so the picture on the left as opposed to the picture on the right, which is increased on a soft surface, because obviously you'd get foot sinkage, and if primarily that foot is balanced to heel sink first, that would increase that, destabilize that even more. There is a 4% increase on the loading of the navicular region. Now, on average, we'd like to see on a forelimb the bottom of the pedal bone being a positive angle, like the picture on the right there, and that solar angle would like to ideally be somewhere between 4 to 6 degrees. So if you think the picture on the left there with that pedal bone, the heel of the pedal bone, as it were, is lower than the toe, you would be potentially -4, -5 degree. You'd be -4, -5 degrees from a +4 to 6 degree angle. So you're sat at like -1 there. So ultimately, you could be at 20% more loading across the navicular. And certainly when you look at it, for those of you that have seen an X-ray before, if you look at the little bone sat at the back there on the bottom from one, that's the navicular bone that's sat there. If I move my cursor, I don't know if you can see it, but this bone here, you can see the position that that's sat in, and you can see on the left hand side how the gap that's sat in here, it's pinched here and it's closer here and it's wider there. So you can see the whole joint is put under pressure, and that's something that with shoeing I can have a positive effect on. Trimming plays a huge part into that, but the positive that shoeing does is I can bring good mechanics into a situation. And also, for every 1 centimetre the toe is too long for your horse, be it with a shoe on or off, it's the equivalent of 50 kilos of intrinsic weight on the horse's back. So that's effectively making the horse's body have more loading, and it's having that effect on the horse's posture, the horse's back, and the way that it loads through its limbs. And the one thing, again, I don't want to seem like I'm bashing boots, but there is no science that I'm aware of that says that boots are a good thing for a horse's leg. Now, obviously, we know that there is increased friction, increased concussion into the horse's foot, but again, there isn't any science that says once you get up to the fetlock that has any sort of negligible or damaging effect. But I do know that with correctly trimmed feet, correctly fitted shoes, that actually we can give a whole lot more stability, because we are able to fit outside of the hoof capsule. And certainly with some of the boots that are there on the market, there are some really good ones. Just to name a few, and I don't want to sound like I'm pushing any, but I've seen the Scoot boots. They fit really well. And I've had a lot of success with horses in those. But some of the boots that I have found available for sale, I think I'd be very dubious as to the actual positive effect on the horse's limb in the long term, because you're unable to give that balance. Because ultimately, with the boots that you have there, you are increasing the length of that horse's leg. So where you have a deviation, where you have a twist, you're just adding to that. You're not necessarily taking away from it. So the take homes that I want to give is, it's important. You know, farriers don't talk about nutrition enough, and I think it was really interesting listening to Mark last week. One of the reasons I think we don't talk about nutrition enough is because we're aware that we're not necessarily the most qualified people to talk about it. And obviously, because of the nature of our profession, we have to be, we are held accountable. So the one thing that I would say is, I can say, and I do feel qualified enough to have an opinion on, is the fact that I know from my own point of view, if I eat bad food, I get bad skin. If I have bad skin, then that ultimately is going to affect everything. So your nail strength, etc. So absolutely, it's important that you look when you're looking at maintaining your horse's health, or you've got a problem with poor feet, that you look at how you manage that horse, and the nutrition that horse has to be absolutely spot on. So the one thing I'd say, it's really important that you get a qualified nutritionist. Believe it or not, there's only about 20 in the UK, but they are out there, and it is important to make sure that you find one, and that you discuss what your horse needs, because Dr. Google isn't correct in what your horse wants. And again, I've got pictures up there of the Land Rover and the Farriery. You know, each one gives you a different conformation. Each one gives you a different foot type, and it's about optimizing what you have. Correction will help the horse's performance and longevity and ease of management. There's two pictures that I've put on here from this week. So top right and second row right, you'll see that's the same horse's foot. Top right is that horse ready to be shod at 6 weeks, and that horse's foot, second right, is about an hour later. So you don't want to have your horse's feet looking like they're desperate to be shod, because you wouldn't drive your car around and only get it serviced when it's belching out black smoke or it makes a knocking noise. We all understand getting our cars serviced at intervals, and the more mileage that we do, the more that we have to get that, or the shorter that interval needs to be. That's something with horses' feet that we see a lot of, where people's shoeing cycle effectively is dictated to by the economics of finances. Ultimately, that is something where I think, you know, the barefoot approach to stuff works so much better for some horses, because ultimately, when a horse has shoes on, you have to have it serviced. You have to have that foot reshod within a certain amount of time, because it is a welfare issue. But when it's not trimmed, when it's not shod, then obviously you don't have that same point where actually the shoe then starts working against it. So, and I do think we have situations where horses are being shod that don't necessarily need to, but it's like a bit of a comfort blanket for some riders. And then bottom right, you see a chestnut horse. There's a before and after. This was a horse that came to my forge last week with performance issues. It had hind limb issues. It had suspensory pain. It had proximal suspensory issues. It had cock and joint issues in front. And this was the horse to the right. About 2 hours later, after we'd done our gait analysis on it, worked out how we can set this horse up as optimal as possible. And you can see from its posture the effect. Certainly, if I draw everyone's attention to the hind limb and the hind limb position, how that horse is much more correct and much more balanced and just posturally so much more stronger and better in the way that it stood. And that's not magic. That's not me saying how amazing I am. It's just that's showing the positivity that the mechanics of putting the right mechanics in when you have a problem. And I think that for me is one of the things I want to make clear, is that shoeing gives us the ability to make something that's suboptimal or something that's a problem. We can give you the mechanical advantage to get past that and do that. And I think that's pretty amazing. So I'd like to say thank you very much to the BHS for giving us an opportunity to speak. The one thing I would like to say is also as a take home is the BFBA nutritional partners are NAF, and I myself have worked with NAF for a few years now. And the one thing I'll say, I don't want this to look like a sales pitch, but there are very few companies that have the same integrity that NAF does, and certainly from an association point of view, you know, their wealth of knowledge and their desire to help everyone. There is a number of qualified nutritionists that work within the business. They have a number of qualified vets that work within the business, and certainly the quality of their products is really important. There's loads of companies out there that want to give advice, but it might not necessarily be the correct one. And I think that's really important as a take home. If any of you have any problems, you need to speak to the right sort of people. You know, you need to speak to qualified and people that are quality assured. I did a factory tour of NAF a few weeks ago, and the one thing I was amazed by, they keep samples of everything that they have made for the last 3 years, and they keep that in their lab to make sure that if there's any positive testing, and go into the other thing, NAF is one of the few companies which guarantee that they are clean sports. So effectively, there's nothing in their range that will give you a positive dope test when you're competing in competition. And you need to be really clear. That's anything that you put on your horse's feet, anything you put on its hair or skin, or you feed it, or you brush it with. There is an opportunity for any topical application, any hoof oil, any ointment or shampoo or supplement to have something in it that may give you a positive test. And if you are someone that is a member of a riding club, or you're someone that is a member of a national league, or you compete internationally, that's something now that we have to be so careful about, because it could be the slightest trace, and that's enough to effectively ruin you and your horse's career. So, sound like I'm banging a bit of a drum, but it just needs to make sure that if you are going to get advice, make sure it's off someone that is qualified to give it. And ultimately, please make sure you work with your vet and your farrier to find the best solution for both you and your horse. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ben, for that fascinating presentation, and thank you to Axel as well. I think Ben raised a really good point there at the end about the anti-doping. Those of you that are competing and aware of anti-doping, you're probably in the minority. If you're competing at British dressage, British show jumping, British eventing, at the lowest level, you are likely at some point to be dope tested. All the way up to international. It is not just at the big shows, at internationals, at 2-star, 3 stars, all the way down at grassroots affiliated. If you're affiliated, If you belong to showing organisations, the NPS and BSPS, you are going to be likely to be tested at some point. So being really aware of that is really, really important. Ben and Axel, could I ask you to put your cameras back on, please? You've disappeared off the screen. And Axel, if you could unmute now, please. Brilliant, thank you. I think, first of all, Ben's gone right up in my estimation that Rory is the best horse that he ever shoes. And who knew that Ben Benson watched Strictly Come Dancing? We now have so much to talk about Ben, because one of my favourite sayings, because I use it from a coaching point of view, from a dancer's posture point of view, and one of my favourite lines from Strictly Come Dancing is, "You shouldn't be wearing your shoulders as earrings." And I love that as a posture correction. There are some questions come in, and the first question I think is probably going to be more directed to you, Ben, but Axel, I'd be interested your take on it as well. How much practical CPD is a qualified farrier obliged to do, and how is that checked upon? The second part of the question is, what proportion of the qualification is about different types of trimming, brackets, barefoot and prep for a shoe, as opposed to shoemaking? Are you both happy with that question?
Yeah, I might need to repeat it halfway in case I get a bit lost.
No
So at the moment, as far as practical, you can, there isn't an actual set amount. So what we're seeing at the moment is a lot of guys are doing their CPD on things that affect them day to day. The association is running a lot of courses. We've got one running on laminitis and application of clogs and things like that. So from a practical point of view at the moment, it's there for you to kind of fill. I can see at some point it becoming guided. As an opener, our apprenticeship has just been, we've went through the Trailblazer program, which meant our apprenticeship effectively 4 years ago was updated and we had a new apprenticeship. It now gives a barefoot trimming module as part of a specific barefoot trimming module as part of that, and they are then assessed by an examiner specifically on that one thing, and that is awarded on its own, and that's definitely something I can see the CPD now being mirroring. So effectively our apprenticeship is made up of 3 pillars: skills, knowledge and behaviour. So skills would obviously be your practical, knowledge obviously your knowledge, and then behaviours would be things like accounting, conflict management, you know, all the things that actually are part of being that professional that we all are. So it's encouraging guys to do that. So I can see that certainly being given an amount, but at the moment, you know, guys are able to do all their CPD on the practical aspects of, you know, trimming, applying clogs, all those sorts of things.
Thank you, Ben. Axel, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
No, I think that's a very, very good answer.
I've got an answer here regarding competing under barefoot. The only association I know that doesn't allow barefoot is the SHB GB Hunters and Working Hunters. The Show Horse Association allow both. And I think it's an interesting bit when it comes to judging. I do a bit of judging myself. I have judged hunters, riding horses, so on in the past. Traditionally, these were always judged on grass. However, a lot of the county shows now do it on surface. I still ride judge for a different association where I will ride them barefoot, and they are ponies. I think it's a really interesting one from the point of view of looking at professionals versus amateurs, and I'm talking about producers. When it comes to a lot of these horse classes, they're judged first thing in the morning. Ground can be damp, and as a ride judge, you're not there to set up the horse, you're there to be carried by the horse. So from the point of view of the show rider on their own horse, it's got that value to be able to actually balance it and get it to the point where it is in a self-carriage without the riders actually setting it up. Then that's then where The ride judge will not be doing that. The ride judge will be getting carried. And in the likes of the racehorse classes, the retraining classes, they're not asked to extend as a group. That is done individually by the ride judge. Well, Ben, I think you highlighted how the horse, his back flattens, how it lengthens its frame. We don't talk about the horse galloping now in the show ring. We talk about it doing an extension. However, there should be a rhythm change from the 3 time to the 4 time. Well, very often as a ride judge, I don't ask them to extend. If they're in walk, trot and canter and I feel their balance is poor, I will not extend them, because it's all very well riding the forwards. It's the coming back and suddenly you've got a corner to go round. So me as a ride judge, I don't do that out of choice because I don't want to be underneath a horse. I know of instances where ride judges, and these are some of the top show ride judges in the world, have basically come off horses. I know somebody that's broken both their wrists. I know somebody that's broken their pelvis, and they are hunter judges. One of them is actually coming up to judge in Scotland at a spring show, and she is a superb judge. She's probably the best ladies judge that I've seen. Every horse I've seen her ride, from lightweights, heavyweights, down to the ladies class, which is side saddle, all the horses have gone better for her than what they have for their jockeys, and she's broken both her wrists in the past, which is scary. So I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I judge ponies without shoes who do workers and do flat classes. So for me, a lot of it comes down to the rules, the regulations, and ultimately the insurance that the society actually will have to abide by. It doesn't answer the question, but it gives you hopefully a little bit more opinion around it.
I think if I can jump on, the one thing as well, certainly with the performance side, so one of my hats that I do, I work with our para dressage development squad. And ultimately, where you have riders there that might not necessarily have the strength to ask for collection, or they might only have one gate that or 2 gates that they're able to compete at, that's where setting that horse up, like you were just alluding to there, Eric, setting the horse up to be as stable as it can be in itself and its body is crucial. One of the things I remember watching a really good rider have a lesson from a very, very good trainer, and the horse was getting on in its years, but it was still a 5-star eventer. But as they were going around, how it started off and how it finished off were 2 totally different pictures, and equally it sort of drew me back to that thing of if you think about it as a car, if you're driving that car and you're having to hold the wheel in a certain way to get the car to go in a straight line, that's not efficient. So that's where it's really
You've frozen, Ben. I don't know if you can hear. You've still frozen. I'm going to move on to the next question. Ben may come back in, and that's all I can do is apologise for Ben freezing. Either that, or from here it looks like he's fallen asleep because he's got his eyes closed. Either could be possible. The next point actually comes back to what we've just discussed. If the disciplines are described by Ben as open-minded about shoeing for competition, why are some showing governing bodies so insistent in shoes, thus barring many from participating, in particularly retraining of racehorses who may have raced barefoot? And I think that would come back to the point that actually in the extension, it would be the judge that would actually do that extension. And very often that can be the stage that some of them may light up, would be my take on it. I don't judge them, but I've stewarded for quite a few of these classes. So actually, I think it's a really interesting discussion, and it's ultimately up to society to decide who is going on with what. So we're going to move on. I'm just going to see if Ben hopefully is going to come back on shortly. So we may end up doubling up on some of these questions. Axel, this one fits in quite nicely to you. Is there a specific reason why there is more flexion in a horse that is barefoot versus shod?
Well, we're talking about the flexion in the sides of the foot, like that, and that is basically because the shoe is rigid. So if you use a shoe that is not that rigid, you will keep a little bit of that flexion in the foot. It's easy as that. But I want to add on a little thing to the rules and regulations. It's like, I think it's very important that there are rules, and rules should be discussed. As a little curiosity, Barefoot racing on trotters was very popular, or is still very popular, and that is because obviously when you don't have a shoe on, there's less weight and they use less energy. But there is now a 3-month ban in the winter from racing shoeless, and that's just like people being pragmatic, saying, okay, in the winter it's harder and it's icy, it's not safe. And I hope that a lot of the regulations will still be taking consideration that the safety of the horse, rather than some people's that they have a notion that their horse is functioning better without a shoe. But like, if we can, if we have a choice from being on the safe side on protecting the horse and also riders from accidents, we should absolutely go for the safest option, 100%.
Very good, thank you for that. And the next one actually is a question to you, Axel. Do the top show jump riders you work for use stud holes at Nation Cup shows, for example, Hickstead, Dublin and Aachen? If so, do you shoe them and then take them off soon after?
We do shoe them, definitely. They are shod with different kinds of shoes depending on how long the shoe is going to stay on. Sometimes they stay on longer because these horses are on tour and they may be doing shows that they need studs in several weekends in a row, and the rider don't want to take the shoes off and on but keep it stable for the trip. Yeah, they get shod in as any other horse.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Ben, I've just asked Axel a question regarding do shoes come on and off horses that jump at Nations Cup? I know you, with being out at the Olympics, have you come across many barefoot that have competed at top level?
Yeah, absolutely, and they do an amazing job. Sorry, apologies for my internet crashing there. I had to give the put a new hamster on the wheel. Yeah, absolutely. I think it depends down to the individual. Certainly, we see horses. Sometimes I've seen horses with different teams, and again, what you have to remember is horses are no different to a footballer or to a rugby player or any sports person. They're managing, as they get older and they get better, they're still managing injuries and they're managing how they got there. So sometimes there might be certain pathologies that they might have that they're still able to compete with, and they're still managed really well. But certainly you might see pads going on to feet and then coming off for different things. And certainly in Tokyo, Axel's clients did an amazing job out there. I'm glad to say Team GB just Ben Mayer managed to pip him, but no, I mean, as a team, you look at the performance. I mean, how many of your team are barefoot? Is it 2 or 3 out of the 4?
It's 2 at the time, I think. Yeah,
2 at the time, and certainly they were going like trains going around. I mean, Pedder is just an absolute master. Is a master.
Yeah, and he puts in a lot of work into it as well. Absolutely, they are prepared for going barefoot. There's nothing left into coincidence there, I'll tell you that.
No. Just to go back, if I may, the point I was making was just, if like Pedder's is a classic example. Pedder's got a horse that is so strong and jumps so straight, but where you have a horse that has that slight deviation or slight dominance in one side, that's where you as a rider having to sit there and hold that horse asymmetrically changes the effort that horse is then putting in. So the more that you can encourage your horse to be as straight and as symmetrical with you not touching it and you not steering it, the better and the more longevity that horse will have.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah.
Are you happy with that, Axel, or do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, well, yeah, definitely, and I think like you put a finger on something here, because what I emphasize and what I see with like the two top riders, like from Sweden, is one of them is Peder, and I work for him, The other one is Henrik von Eckman, which I've been down visiting his farrier down in Belgium, and his farrier is also like a top. He's a good friend of mine. He's a top farrier. He's called Vincent Lamel, and these guys, they use farriers, and they use farriers for a reason. They don't use barefoot trimmers. I know there's been so-called barefoot trimmers at Peders, but he wants to use a farrier because of one simple thing. A farrier has a choice. We can put on shoes. We have a wider range of what we can apply. And I think that is very important because they are pragmatic. And if they need a shoe nail on tomorrow for any reason, that's what I want.
Could I ask Axel a question, and for my own sort of interest? But what's your sort of options for when you're dealing with some of your top level jumpers, and you know the whole range of them? Do you find yourself using glues and shoes and a combination of? Do you find yourself using plastics? How do you manage those horses throughout the year?
We keep them now like more and more barefoot. They are very much barefoot. Right now when they need anything, that would be for traction, for studding. Then we use aluminium shoes, which stays on for 2 weeks, so they should quite tight to avoid any leverage in any direction. Have used some urethane on the feet when you need it, when they wear, and they wear asymmetrical, so you cannot take off, but you have to add on. But not very limited. Like it also like I can't really say it for sure, but I do also think that horses that doesn't fit into the regime won't be there. So, you know, like if they're too crooked, if they need too much help, they won't be there anyway. It's not that sort. They pick different quality horses in a way. So I shot for another rider, which is at a lower level. He's still been in the Olympics, but he has kind of specialized in taking horses that has issues, and not shoeing at that yard, not shoeing the horses at that yard. It would be impossible, because he got so many horses that need so much help.
And what about when you've got a horse, if you were transitioning it, one of your sport horses, how long would you expect that to take, and what would your program of transition, and what would be your point where you say it's not working out or it's working out, we'll keep going?
Very often there is no transition time at all. They just take them off, ride them, let the horse get used to it somewhat, and then go out and jump it. But again, I had one now actually that I trimmed on Friday, and that was so long to start with, so I had to trim off so much that got sensitive, so that needed a little bit of a little bit help now. But normally, no, they just go out and do it, and but that is also because the environment is so protected that they will never go on gravel in this time. They will just be on the surface and in a box or with boots.
I think that's really interesting you say that. One of the things that I saw with some of the horses that came to Tokyo, they were barefoot. We saw them, but some of the other ones that were there, I remember the riders saying they knew that they could be barefoot there, because before an Olympics happens, there's a test event the year before where all the teams turn up, see the venue, see the surface, see the specifics of what they're going to run on. So they knew that with hoof boots, when they were on the tarmac, that effectively when they got to the venue, they were rubber matting all the way to the arena, ride around the arena, and then rubber matting to the grass where they could be exercised on. So they were able to be efficient on it.
Like you weren't in Herning, were you, in the World Championship in Denmark? No, but they were literally 200 meters that I had to walk on tarmac. And they put boots on to take him out of the box, to walk him down there and take the boots off. They did not walk him a meter on him. That was nice, flat. Like I could have run there without shoes myself. I wouldn't notice. They did not take the chance. Not at all.
How often would you be trimming those horses as well?
every 4 weeks normally, and then Peder would he would be on there with a rasp and take edges off in between. So when we do on regular basis, we X-ray them, both to check angles, but also to check the shape of the foot. The shape is of the perimeter of the foot is the same as the perimeter of the P3, for example. So yeah, it's pretty extensive management. It's not easy. It's definitely not easy. It's probably harder than anything else I've done.
I think it's so interesting to hear, isn't it, the management of top horses at different levels. And I think, you know, we could chat all night because that whole practical side of it really interests me. But I do have another couple of questions I need to ask guys. And we're going to flip a little bit from the show jumping to a dressage question. For a dressage horse reaching the higher levels, with the likes of canter, pirouettes, piaffe, etc., would you always expect them to need hind shoes on to help support?
Not necessarily, no. There's some really good European horses, there's some really good British horses that are working without shoes on. It comes down to the specifics of that horse's conformation. So if you've got 4 legs that are all really nice and straight, really well balanced and some lovely feet underneath, then don't do anything. I think where that comes to is you knowing your own horse. Certainly when you deal with Iberians, the Iberian horses where you've got a really strong muscle mass on some really thin, small legs, you're dealing with mechanics that don't necessarily suit dressage. They suit the sport that horse was bred for, which was effectively, you know, bullfighting. So the horse can go up and down, it can go sideways, it can go forward, but it doesn't necessarily do it while it's collected. So that's where when you have dressage and the movements that you require within, where you're asking that horse to collect, come up through into the bridle, that's where sometimes the mechanics of shoes give the horse the ability to have that little bit more of a safer platform. Certainly when you're perhaps schooling the horses, young horses, it gives them that confidence to be able to sit. But again, that's down to the horse. If you've got a horse that's got really nice straight legs, then no. But if your horse has a little bit of a deviation, or perhaps is muscularly is more dominant on one side than the other, then that's definitely where shoeing can help you.
Axel, do you have any input to that?
Yeah, I do agree. But I also think that when we leave them barefoot on the dressage horse, because when it starts to be more collected, it does wear the plantar part of the foot more, and to protect that can be very important, because what we see then is very often like you have the plantar angle of the P3 is tilting backwards, and you struggle to trim the toe enough to keep a right angle, and that's when you need to protect it. But on the other hand, if they got good frogs and wide feet, they can take the weight. But if they have narrow feet and not that prominent frog, you might struggle to keep a right angle on it, especially with very long fetlock. So again, it's down to conformation, as Ben emphasized over and over again.
Brilliant, thank you. Ben, this is a question for you. Do you have any hints and tips on choice of stud to use, and like for example, where and when?
No, is the honest answer. Again, it comes back down to horse's body weight, speed, environment. So, you know, the course that you're running, the weather that it's there at. So again, if you're going to Mill Street in Ireland in the rainy season, then you're going to want a completely different set of studs than you are from, again, Blenheim in September when it's dry and the ground's like concrete. That comes down to you and your horse. The one thing that I think studs do is they give the rider and the horse the confidence and the stability. Personally, and this is maybe another conversation another day, but I prefer 2 studs to 1, and I prefer them to be as small as possible. But I think this is where, as a rider, you need to go and practice, and you need to work out what suits your horse, because saying that, your horse might actually be far happier with 1 big stud in than it would be with 2 little ones. So all horses are different. You need to go and try, and whilst you practice your cross-country schooling, you need to try different stud selections. I know William Fox Pitt I know Harry Mead was telling me William Fox Pitt has about 300 studs, and he'll walk the course and he'll put a different stud combination in for individual horses for the worst point in the course that he sees. So he'll stud for that specific region because he feels that's where the horse is most got its potential problem. So that's how he does it, and what he puts on horse A is going to be different to B. And I think that's a really sensible thing to do. You know, each horse has its own requirements. You need to work out what suits you.
Axel, do you have any views on studs?
Oh, we use a lot of studs. That's what we use half the year here, but that's eye studs. And I always thought the practice of using one stud, which has been in practice in Britain for a long time, is almost weird. I think that we will see more in the future, even 4 or maybe even 6 studs, but smaller studs, and more fitted for the exact surface they are working on. So more studs is definitely, like all the winter shoeing we're doing. We do that with a minimum of 4 studs, and that's also to keep the balance on the ground. But then again, if you have 2 big studs, that is not like the studs are too big, sorry, that will not affect the leg very good, and there is issues with it as well, of course.
Brilliant, thank you for that, guys. There's another question here about judging, and I presume it refers to Blair and the BHS qualifiers, about are the rules outdated and should they be reviewed? Well, as I sort of said earlier, that would be down to the specific society that we'd be reviewing, and most societies do review fairly regularly, so I would think that would be a watch this space. Quite an interesting question here. When watching a barefoot horse going over stones from the rear and in slow motion, it is possible to see the bulbs of the hoof splitting to allow both sides of the hoof to move independently, allowing the horse to maintain its balance. Watching a shod horse do the same thing, the hoof is unable to move in the same way. Do you have an opinion about this? I don't know who wants to go first.
Axel.
Yes, I do have an opinion on this, and it is of course true. And this is one of the things they measured in the study and did in Sweden now, that they measured what I call the flexion, the foot, that movement. So yeah, and then again, but the next question is that good in all cases? And I think that yes, it can be good for a lot of things, but sometimes we actually need to restrict the flexion, because if the horse can choose where it will go themselves and choose which pace, and with no rider on, that's what it's constructed for. But as long as we ask it to move in places where it probably wouldn't normally do, at speeds it probably wouldn't normally do with a rider on it, sometimes we actually need to restrict the flexion to keep the horse safe. But yes, to the question, definitely it does flex, and not a little bit, quite a lot.
Yeah, I'd like to echo that. I think it comes down to, if that is the right thing for the horse, then that's what you need to do. But equally, you know, if we think about ourselves and what we wear when we go walking, we wear a boot that kind of restricts our ankle and stops us from spraining our ankles. So, you know, think about it. Shoeing with some horses gives them the opportunity to move over stones, move over what terrain they are, without having to necessarily worry about the negatives that those stones might give them. And it might give that little bit more stability and a bit more grip. But equally, we need to allow the horse still has the ability to flex with a shoe on. It's not that the foot is locked in. Certainly, if any of you, when you have your horse shod, if you take the shoes off the farrier and just go and have a look, you can see where the heels are able to expand and contract on the shoe. And certainly there's parameters for where we fit nails and things like that. So whilst we are restricting that expansion and contraction, it is the minimal amount that we can get away with.
Brilliant, thank you. And we're moving to our final questions. We have a horse that is now 13 jumping to 5-star level. I presume it's show jumping, and it's definitely sounder without shoes in front. If the hind shoes are left on, will this create an imbalance, and would she be better barefoot all round?
That is down to the horse, that individual horse. It's hard to tell for that, but what I can say is like, oh, if the horse needs it on the hinds, if it's more comfortable with it on hinds, and you take it off because you think the horse will be more balanced, it won't be more balanced because it's more comfortable with that on the hinds, and the other way around.
Yeah, I agree. Performance is the answer. With those sorts of horses, rip up the rule book. You know, what makes that horse feel good? You're the rider. If you feel going into a fence that the shoes give that horse the stability to be able to have that base of support to jump that fence and jump it in a straight line as possible, then perfect. If it doesn't need them coming down on its front feet, then that's fine too. It's
come to think of it, I actually had a couple of horses that we shod on the hind. That was barefoot in training, and we shod it on the hind for competitions because they felt that the rider felt that he had more contact with the ground and more power when they had shoes on the hinds. So yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So the final question starts off with great presentation, guys. So somebody's giving you the big thumbs up. We like that. How do you feel about non-traditional shoes such as rubber ones, etc.?
Axel, I'll let you go first.
When I did my apprenticeship in at the vet college in Norway, we found they had a huge collection of old shoes, and they found some Canadian rubber shoes that was actually over 100 years old. So like, I think we should be a little bit careful what we call traditional or not. When it comes to composite shoes and rubber shoes and different things there, I think that the same rules applies to them as other things. For example, shoes that lift the foot off the ground too much, so you reduce the load sharing, is not good, whether it's in rubber or not. That's one thing. I can talk about these kinds of shoes forever because I've seen a lot of it. Mostly not good. The other thing is that it's very often very hard to fit accurately to the foot. That is actually the worst problem. It's like any shoe that might have some properties that is good. You can say, okay, you can even do research on it and say, like, okay, they dampen the shock and so forth. If we cannot fit it to the foot in a good way, it won't work. Easy as that.
Yeah, I totally agree that there is a number of composite shoes that are making a resurgence on the market, and I don't think some of them actually have the research to back up the claims that they say they do. And certainly I personally don't like shoes that grip too much. Certainly if your horse is working on a surface, the less grip is better, which is why, you know, we know with barefoot it's better for feet. So yeah, I'm not a fan of the composite shoes personally.
Brilliant, thank you. So thanks to Ben and Axel for taking those questions. That's much appreciated. To start to draw this evening to a close, I'd like to say a big thank you, first of all, from Webinar 1, David Greenwood, Mark Trussler and Sarah Logie. From Webinar 2, Sarah Brown and Mark Johnson. And finally from this evening, Axel Vibe and Ben Benson, for another brilliant presentation, guys. Really appreciate it. There is another BHS Scotland Interactive Day coming up. It's Tuesday, March the 7th. It's from 9:30 in the morning till 2 at the BHS Hub in Stirling. And this is titled Strengthening the Horse and the Human Relationship. It comes under sort of the Social License to Operate banner, or a name that's starting to be banded around, which I've heard, which actually I prefer, is equine safeguarding. It's going to be hosted by James Hick, who's the Chief Executive of the BHS, Rolly Ors, MRCVS Chief Executive of World Horse Welfare. If you haven't heard him speak on this subject, he's really good, really sound, is really practical, and I know I've been lucky enough to hear it on one of his first presentations, and it's really developed and grown. Really interesting to speak to. Our own Scottish Patrick Print, OBE FBHS, will also be on the panel along with Sam York FBHS. These tickets can be purchased through Ticket Tailor, link found in the BHS Facebook page, or you can contact the BHS Hub directly, or Julie Hanna at bhs.org, who I've spoken to earlier. So this was our final evening of the three-part series. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the British Horse Society for facilitating this webinar series, and the British Farriers and Blacksmith Association for their support in this and providing us the contacts to get these amazing top-level farriers, blacksmiths, trimmers, people that endorse Barefoot, people that endorse boots, people that endorse shoe, and actually having a really open-minded opinion and some really, really good discussion around the topic, and also the rules and regulations by which our farriers are actually managed and guided throughout the year. So a huge thank you to Axel, huge thank you to Benford Knight, a huge thank you to you all for supporting this groundbreaking series of webinars, which has happened over these 3 Monday evenings in February. And who knows what next year will bring in February. It's certainly past my weeks getting ready for them. So fingers crossed BHS move the goalposts again and actually provoke these conversations. And sometimes they can be difficult conversations, but the BHS by heart has welfare at its organisation, and it's great that we can actually do a 360 round and ultimately support who we're all here for, which is the horse. So thank you all very much for this evening, guys. Good to see you and hope to see you again in the future. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.